Alright, so what did we do last class? I think we looked at the rule of the square, right? And then we also just did a few puzzles on like the fork and the pin, right? Yeah. Okay. So today we're just gonna like continue finishing that, look more into the rule of the square, and then we'll also we might start like learning about opposition, but I mainly just want to like use today's like review session, all right? So we can like consolidate everything we've learned. Okay, but first let's just start with a few puzzles. So like before, we're just gonna do some forks and pins, all right? So forks and pins. Actually, first let's start with a couple mate in one. This is all just checkmate in one puzzles, right? This is white to play, and it's checkmate in one move. This one's actually pretty hard. So if you know the answer, you could just raise your hand in the Google Meet, and I'll call on you. Okay, Viksha, you're on mute. Okay, alright, fine. We'll go to Revanche for now. Revanche?
Rook to d2.
Yeah, that's right. Rook to d2, alright? And this is checkmate, right? This one is like a slightly strange one because it's a checkmate in the like direct middle of the board, right? Which isn't something that you'll see often. So what happens here is that the rook is giving check. The opponent's king can't move forward anywhere here because our king is guarding all these three squares. Can't go to d3 or d5 because our rook is guarding both of these squares. Can't go to c3 because of its own knight. Can't go to c4 because our knight is guarding that square. And it can't go to c5 because our pawn is guarding that square. So surprisingly, every single square around the king is being guarded, even though it's in the middle of the board. Alright? And there's no way to capture our rook, and there's no way to block. So that's checkmate. Alright, what about here? This is white to play. White to play and checkmate in one move. Okay, Vishnu.
Pawn to h5.
Yeah, that's right. Pawn to h5. So this here, the rook is guarding all three of these squares, so the king can't move back. The king can't capture either of these pawns because our king is guarding. Can't go to f6 or h6 because both squares our pawn is guarding. And it can't go to f5 because our king is guarding. Alright? Does that make sense to everyone? Okay? Alright. Let's go to the next. This is black to play. Checkmate in one move. Okay, let's go Adrian.
Queen to h2.
Nice, yeah. Queen to h2, checkmate. The king can't take because our bishop is guarding. And both the other squares are defended by our queen. Okay, we'll do one more and then we'll go on to the fork and the pin. Alright. Uh, this is black to play. Checkmate in one. Alright, Dave.
Rook to d2.
Okay, Dave says rook d2. Is there any other guesses? Mateo?
Same as Dave.
Okay. Who else? What about, let's go Isa. Oh, you're on mute. Just hit the unmute button on. Okay, yeah.
Rook to G1.
Yeah, actually, rook to g1 here is the right answer, alright? So, nice job. So, you guys will see why. Rook to g1, the king can't go here because of its pawn, and it's guarded, the king guards both of these squares, right? So this is checkmate, but in the, you guys said rook to d2. Well, that's a good move, it's a good check, but the problem is that the king can still go to e1 or, c1. So the king can still run away, and rook to g1 gives checkmate. Alright? So is there any questions? No? Okay, so now let's move on to the fork and the pin. The pin. Okay. So does anybody remember what the fork was? You could just raise your hand. Alright, Adrian?
I'm attacking two pieces in the same time.
Nice, exactly. The fork is when you attack two pieces with only one piece, right? Nice. Alright, and what about the pin? Does anybody remember what the pin is? Okay, Dave?
It's like a diagonal, like, so let's say, like the rook, it's just like a diag. So if one moves, you could attack the other one behind.
Yeah, that's basically it. So if one piece moves, then the piece behind it is under attack, right? Because they're in the same diagonal or maybe the same row, right? Alright, nice. So that's good. Alright, then, so that's what we're gonna look at here. The forks and the pins. Okay, first, I want you guys to identify like which ones the pins are. So like for example, in this position, there's one pin right here, right? Our pawn can't take here because then behind it our queen would be under attack, right? Can anybody see the other pin in this position? All right, Vishnu.
If you move the knight, the bishop can attack the rook.
Exactly. So this right here. If the knight gets moved here, let's say the knight goes to f5, then the white can take our rook on d8, right? So that wouldn't be very good for us. All right, here looks like these puzzles are like getting a bit, they're not very on topic like for forks and pins. But here what you want to do basically, I'll just show, does anybody like see a way for us to win material? That's I think the point of this puzzle. Dave?
It's not that. My battery's becoming low.
All right. Do you can go get a charger or something if you need to like drop out of the call. Okay. All right. So basically here they want a way to trap the opponent's bishop. All right. So you play f6, and it's not exactly the best puzzle to showcase the fork, but I guess it's fine. It's just one. Okay, this is a good one. All right. So here you guys need to. I'll give you the first move for now. We'll just start off a bit basic, and then we can make more advanced. So the first move is rook to d8. Now here, you have to use a pin to win material. Where's a possible pin that you can see? The two pieces are in the same row or same diagonal. Oh, Revanche?
Bishop to d3.
Nice, exactly. Bishop to d3. So here, you can see that the bishop is attacking the queen, and behind the queen is the opponent's king. So now that means that the queen can't move away, right? If it was if there wasn't a pin, then the queen could easily move away and protect itself. Like it could go to b4 or something. Or maybe it can take our pawn on g2. But because of the pin, it's stuck. And so if now the computer made the move to take, alright, which I guess is the best move, because let's say you try and get out of the pin and play g6, right? Let's say black tries to play g6, so there's no longer a pin, then you can just take the queen. So now when they take, now what do we do? Vishnu?
You take the queen with the rook.
Exactly. Rook takes d3. Nice. All right. This is what is this? White to play. This one is pretty difficult, I'd say. Okay, Vishnu.
Um, knight to c7.
Yeah, so that's like the idea for a fork here, right? You want to go knight c7 and then you attack your opponent's king and rook. But can anyone see why knight c7 right now doesn't work? What can black play here? Remember, when you're in check, you can capture, block, or move. So, Isa, what would black play?
They would catch her with the queen.
Exactly. Black could just use their queen and capture our knight. So that's the reason that knight c7 doesn't work. So here, I'm pretty sure the first move is we would take. Alright, so it's just a simple capture. Alright, now we can see that the queen moved away. So now what do we do? Bravanch? You're on mute. Bravanch, you're on mute.
Knight to c7.
Nice. So here is where the fork came into use, right? First, we took this knight, right? And because we took the knight, now our rook is attacking the queen. So now when the queen moves, now it's no longer defending the square, right? The queen is no longer defending c7. So now our knight can go to c7. That's check, attacking the rook and the king. Now when the king moves, now what do we do? Viksha?
The knight can kill the rook.
Exactly, the knight takes on a8. Alright. Okay, this one's another good one. Alright, so this is white to play. Or, sorry, not white to play, black to play. And you have to try and use a fork.
And I was like, say hi, right? And I was like, oh, hi, right?
Okay,
Calling
Vishnu.
my number.
Queen takes pawn on e4.
Different stuff.
Yeah, that's right. So queen takes e4. Now you can
So
see
frustrating.
here, because of queen takes e4, the well, black is attacking the rook and the king at the same time, right? So now if the king moves, which is I think what the computer made the king move, right? So now what do we do? Okay, let's go Viksha.
The queen can kill the rook because the king moved.
Exactly. Since the king moved, now we can just take the rook. Alright, let's keep going, do a few more of these. Alright, so this one's a good one too. Uh, this is white to play. You have to use a fork. So where is a possible fork? Let's go Revanche.
Rook to e5.
Nice. Rook to e5. Yeah, this one was like a bit of a strange one. Alright, so rook to e5, you're attacking the bishop and the king at the same time, right? So now if the king moves, let's say, so the king moved to f4, now we can just take the bishop for free, right? So there's actually a trap here. So the trick was you shouldn't play knight to e3, right? Let me just share this. Okay, you guys can see this new tab? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Alright, so the trick was the another like possible fork you could see is knight to e3 check, and this looks good, right? You're attacking both of the opponent's queen or not queen, king and rook at the same time, right? But now what is black gonna play here? Remember, it's similar to the idea we saw with on the previous tactic. Let's go Vishnu.
The bishop can capture the knight.
Exactly. The bishop will capture our knight, right? And now, like, the fork is not as useful. Because even though we did the fork, our opponent defended against it. He captured our forking piece. So now we have to take back, and now it's equal, right? We didn't gain anything. Versus before with rook e5, we were able to win the bishop. So it's important to notice what your opponent might be able to play. Alright, let's keep going. Okay, so try and find a way to win a pawn using a fork. Remember, a fork, it's usually going to require a check. So think of the checks first, and then you'll find the forcing move, and that will give you the fork. Revanche.
Queen to h4.
Nice. Queen h4, right? So here the fork was you're attacking the opponent's king and this pawn at the same time. Notice here we could also, it's not a bad move. We could just take our opponent's pawn on e5. There's nothing wrong with that. But queen h4, usually when there's a check like this, where you can force your opponent to do something to weaken their position, like it's happening right now, you should try and play that. So queen h4, now g3. Now we take, right? We're going to take the pawn. And now notice there was another fork right here. Remember the previous example? I think one of you guys said queen takes e4 and then you're attacking the rook and the king. Now it's the exact same thing happening here. Queen takes e4, you're attacking the
Hello.
rook and the king. Alright? So you could see the same tactical theme just happen 2 times, right? Where we win now, okay, when the queen moves, the rook is undefended over here. We can capture. Right, so you'll notice that the same theme can occur multiple times. It's not just exclusive. You'll only see it one time in chess and then you'll forget about it. You can see it many times. Alright, I think this will end up being the last one. Let's try and think of a fork.
Is it? Do we have to do a fork for white to move?
Yeah, it's white to move and you have to play a fork. Okay, tab it.
Bishop f6.
You mean knight f6? Because it's white to play.
Yeah.
Alright, okay, so tab it says knight f6. Does anyone have a different idea? Viksha?
I was gonna say the same as the habit.
Okay, alright. Alright, Dave?
Knight to d2.
Knight d2 here.
Yeah.
Alright, okay. And let's do one more revanche.
Knight takes d6.
Alright, and knight takes d6. Actually, wait, Tabit, did you have an addition to yours?
Yeah. Knight c5.
Alright, so instead of knight, or I think, yeah, so knight c5. Okay. Now we have a lot of options here. Alright, let's look at each one, alright? I'm just playing a random move. Alright, let's look here. Alright, so this is the position, right? So we had knight f6, knight d2, knight c5, and knight takes d6. Alright, let's look at each one. So knight f6, alright, this looks like a really good fork, right? You're attacking your opponent's bishop, rook, and their king. So you're attacking 3 pieces at the same time. But the main problem with this is, can anybody see what black would play? Mateo? Mateo, you're on mute.
The pawn would kill him.
Exactly, right? So the pawn would just take our knight. So even though it's a good fork, it is unfortunate that we'll just end up losing our knight, right? So the black pawn can just take our knight. That's the problem with knight f6. Now let's look at knight d2. So there's actually nothing really wrong with this, right? This is a decent move. You're attacking your opponent's rook, right? But there's actually like there's a bit of a tactic here. Uh, mm, uh I'll just show it to you guys honestly. So here the problem is even though we're attacking the rook, black can take our queen, right? And now we have our knight guarding our queen, which is fine, right? So we can take back with our knight. But this rook over here can now take our knight, and now we just lost a piece. Before, you'll notice this knight was standing in between the rook and the queen, right? So after it moved away, it kind of formed like a battery. It's like instead of having the power of only one piece, here it's blocked, right? So it's only the queen attacking our queen. So let's say, or other way. Let's say we did something like this, alright? Let's just say we just moved a rook here. Now, if black tried to take our queen, we could take back with our knight. And now the rook is not directly attacking our knight, right? But if we play knight ed2, now the rook is indirectly attacking our queen. So now when opponent takes, we have to take back the queen. If we take back the rook, then our opponent can just move back the queen, right? Or he'll actually no, he can take our knight here, and now we end up going down. We end up going down a whole queen, right? So you guys can see that it's not knight ed2 isn't really the best move, right? Because it allows black to form this battery and take our queen and win a piece. Okay, but that was a good guess. All right, knight c5. All right, so here I think the idea was to attack the bishop and the pawn, right? Again, not bad, but what can black play? Viksha?
The bishop can kill or the pawn can kill.
Yeah, the bishop can take, the pawn or the pawn could take, and even the rook could take if it wanted, alright? But yeah, usually here the bishop is the best move, right? So it was a good try for fork, but unfortunately there's too many options for black to recapture, alright? So it's not there. So
Which one's the correct one then? If we all are
okay.
wrong.
No, there's still one more option, right? Knight takes d6, alright? I think Revanche said this, alright? And this also not a bad move, alright? Knight takes d6. Now, the idea here I think is pretty clear, right? We're attacking both of the rooks. But, like before with knight ed2, what can black play here? Dave?
The pawn can take.
No, the pawn can't take, or there's no pawn attacking the knight, so. We're talking about what will black play here? Viksha?
Wait, well, can black play for the knight?
What can black play in this position? Even though it's in black is in a fork, he can still do something to save himself.
Wait, oh, yeah. The pawn can kill the knight.
Remember, the pawn is going, black is going down,
Oh.
so he can't go up. Alright, it's good. We can move on to someone else. How about Michael?
Uh, but the bishop can get the pawn.
Oh, you're talking, well, what
Yeah.
square? What square?
Uh, the seventh one.
Oh, this bishop?
Yeah, yeah.
And it can take the pawn
The
where?
pawn. No, 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 not the pawn. The knight.
Remember, so this is the light squared bishop, so it can
Yeah.
only move on the light squares. So since it only moves on a diagonal, it unfortunately can't take the knight. Alright, that's good, I guess, though. How about Isa? This one was probably one of the more difficult puzzles. Isa? You're on mute. Isa, you're on mute.
The um the rook could go to c6, or even if they did capture it, the queen could take it.
Okay, so you're saying like it's fine even if they capture the rook, then we'll still be able to capture the knight back. For example, if you go rook here, then they take, we'll just take back with their bishop, right? Okay, that's not bad. Alright, but the actual reason is, you guys can notice, actually, let's give Revanche a chance really quick. Revanche, do you see what black will play?
Yeah, the queen could take the other queen.
Exactly. Alright, so this is something called indirect defense. It's a pretty advanced concept, and I'm surprised to see it in this kind of puzzle. So you guys can see that we had a lot of options, right? But even knight takes d6, this isn't necessarily right. The problem here is that after we take, this, remember, I was talking before, once the knight moves out of here, I think Dave suggested knight ed2. So now we're attacking the rook, right? But the problem is it allows black to form this battery. And the same thing when knight takes d6, this battery still exists. So now black can capture the queen. Now you guys are probably wondering, what if black takes a rook? Now what, or white takes the black rook. Now what will black play? Viksha?
The bishop can go back and front so the bishop can kill the knight.
Yeah, that's one option, but there's actually a better option. Notice that we have a queen. Black has a queen right now, right? Let me just look the board. Black has an extra queen, so what should he do to the queen? Isa? Isa, you're on mute.
The queen could like take it.
Yeah, I mean, could you specify which taking which?
It could take the pawn.
There's two pawns. H2 or F2?
H2.
Not exactly. So the thing is, the H2 pawn, if you take, then the knight can just capture it back, right? Now we just lost the queen. But on the other hand, I mean, we don't even necessarily need to take this pawn, right? What we could do is we could just move our queen. We have black has an extra queen right now, so there's no need for black to like lose his queen. He could just move it back. So let's say he goes queen e7. Now black saved his queen, and even though we didn't get the knight, we get to keep our queen, and that's more important, right? Because before, let's say I think Viksha suggested to take, right? So instead of taking the knight, but now our queen is hanging, so he could take that. So this was a pretty complicated puzzle. I'll show you the answer really quickly, just like for a reference. Basically, what you're first supposed to do is take the queen, and now we take the pawn. All right. Now there's no more battery, right? Because there's nothing left for the rook to attack. The rook isn't attacking anything anymore. Or am I not even sharing that tab? Okay, here we go. I'm sorry. Okay. So you can see, we take the queen first because now there's no longer any battery, right? So now when we take on d6, there's an easy fork and there's no way for the rook to attack anything. And I think Isa brought up this point. If, let's say, black just moves the rook, that doesn't seem like a bad... Okay, that is not the best move. Okay, fine. Let's say black takes the pawn, right? Now, even once we take the rook, like this, now we got an extra piece, or an extra exchange, right? Now let's say, let me just show this really quickly. So here, right, we're in this position. We take the rook, and now let's say black takes our knight. Now we just got a rook, an extra rook, and our opponent got an extra knight. And we know that the rook is worth 5 points, and the knight is worth 3 points, right? So now we just gain 2 points of material. Alright, does anybody have any questions? This is a pretty complicated puzzle. Usually it won't get this, like, advanced, but I just wanted to show you guys one complicated one for, like, what's coming in the future. Vishnu? Do you have a question? Alright, that might be a accidental hand raise. How about Revanche?
When the bishop takes the knight, the rook can take the other rook on a4.
Oh, so you're talking about right now rook takes a4? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true, but the bishop is still guarding a4, so he'll just capture back, alright? So it's not like we won an extra rook there, we just traded the rook there, right? Just rook, we took a rook, and then now a black took back the rook. So now we still have one extra rook, and our opponent has an extra bishop, right? So it's kind of even in the end. Alright, so that took a bit longer than I thought it would, but that's fine. I mean, I think you guys have learned forks and pins pretty well. You got almost all of them right almost immediately, so that's good. So now let's just continue with what we did last week, alright? Give me a second. Okay, alright. So, what did we do last week? Actually, let's do it from black's point of view, because I feel like we see everything from white's point of view. Alright, this is black to move, right? And what we did last week was we looked at the rule of the square, right? Oh, just give me a okay. We looked at the rule of the square, right? And does anybody remember what the rule of the square was, or at least like a kind of basic definition? Okay, Isa, you're on mute.
It's like something another piece can get in, but it's not good for the square because then it won't work, kind of.
Yeah, I think I kind of get you what you mean. So, you're talking more about the part like if the one piece is not inside the square, then it doesn't work, right? What about someone else? Does anyone have like another definition? Let's go, Vishnu.
If the queen can get in the square that the pawn made, then the pawn can be captured.
Yeah, I think you mean the king, right? Not the queen.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's another definition. So that's you guys both got it, right? That's basically you understand what we're talking about. So does anybody remember the steps on how we create this square? Someone raise their hand and tell me what the first. Okay, tap it.
Pawn to a6.
Okay, yes. How about like the overall plan? Like, remember we talked about how big is this? How about just what's the four corners of the square right now for the pawn?
بابا مش راح اعطيك لا كبار ولا صغار ماما. هذا توضيع اشياء على الفاضي ليش بدك تحطيها؟
Yep.
h7.
استخدموا لهذه
Okay.
الاشياء.
A7, and then what was the other one?
خلص استخدموا الصندوق اللي
h1.
Okay, I think you said H7 too, right? And the last one is what square does the pawn turn into a queen?
a1.
Okay, so this is pretty close. I think you might have just miscounted one square. It's actually G7 and not H7, but I think yeah, you got the point, right? Because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares until the pawn turns into a queen, and then so we move 6 squares to the side. All right, and that's the entire rule of the square, right? Now we just like finish out the square.
Sleepy.
Okay, so that's the entire square. Alright. Now, basically, if you guys remembered, what the rule of the square is if our opponent's king can get inside the square or like on the like edge of the square, right? So this is what the square we were talking about. If our opponent's king can get inside the square, then our pawn is unable to turn into a queen. Like it won't get there in time. For example, can white reach like eventually what I'm going to ask you is without any help, I'm just going to give you this position and ask you will white be able to make it in time to save the pawn, all right? But for now I'll help you guys a little bit, all right? So we have this square, all right? So, can the white king get inside the square right now? Okay, let's go Dave.
It can.
It can, right? So what's an example? Like what's the move that the white king could make to get inside the square?
He just moves one step.
Do you mind giving like the notation for the square? Like this e5 or something?
G, G2.
Nice, exactly. G2. That's a good square. It got inside the square, right? So now the king should be safe. But remember, I think near the end of class, we talked about what happens if the pawn is on the base rank, right? It can move one squares or two squares. For now, let's just consider it goes one square. So now, can someone tell me what the four corners of the squares are? Of the pawn squares? Michael?
They get smaller.
Yeah, so what are the four corners? Like this is A6. What is the other three? Remember, to say the notation, you just go take the letter and the number. So, for example, this is C4. So, what are the other four corners of the square? Alright, you want to give someone else a shot then?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, alright, what about Viksha?
The corners are A6, A2, F2, and A6, F6.
So you got F6, right? But remember, the square that the pawn turns into a queen on is the corner of the square. So not A2, but instead A.
F3 and A3. Wait,
No, it
no.
would be A1 and F1
Yeah.
because that's the square that the pawn turns into queen on, right? But nice. It looks like you counted the number of squares, right? So that is the forming the basis of the square, right? So F6, A6, A1, and F1. So now can white get inside the square? Let's go Vishnu.
He can.
Yeah, and do you want to give an example of a square that the king can move to?
F2.
F2. Alright, yeah, that works. F2, and now the king is still inside the square. So now the square will get smaller. How about one more time? What's the four corners? Dave?
A1, 1, C2.
C2 here.
Yeah.
Okay, and
I meant C4. Wait. Yeah, C3. I meant C3.
C3.
And C1.
Oh,
And
okay.
then A3.
Okay, so you're saying like this is the square.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, because there's other ones.
Remember,
Yeah.
The big one, the big one.
the first one, there's always one corner of the square is going to be where the pawn is, alright? So that one is A5. Then the second one is always where the pawn turns into a queen. So that's A1. So now we automatically have two of the squares. And now we have one, two, three, four. We counted four squares until the pawn turns into a queen. So now we count four squares to the right. So what square does that lead us to?
I just really
So
think it's
then,
I told you this like
Anyone? Oh, okay, let's go Viksha.
It's A5, A1, E1, and E5.
Exactly. So you count four squares to the left and you get E1 and then you just complete the square out, right? So notice it gets like just slightly progressively smaller every single time, which is I think what Michael said before, right? So it gets smaller every single time until eventually the pawn turns into a queen. But the problem here is the king is also always inside the square. Every single time the square shrinks, the king is always one step ahead, right? He's always able to reach there in time. And so, because of that, our pawn won't directly be able to turn into a queen, right? Because here, when we turn into a queen, white will capture. Excuse me. Alright. So, you can see that that didn't work, right? Because every single time our pawn moved up one square. And because of that, our opponent's king got there just in time, right? But now, does anybody see Let's just say, okay, the first move, white plays king g2. Now, instead of a6, what if you play a5? Now the corners of the square, it moved down 2 squares, right? Before it was a7, g7, g1, and a1. But now it's a5, e5, e1, and a1. So you'll notice it dropped 2 squares at a time instead of just 1. And that was because our pawn skipped a square, right? Because the first time a pawn moves, it doesn't have to just move 1 square. It can move 2 squares. Looks like there's a few questions. Adrian?
If the king captures the black pawn, it's a draw.
Exactly. So that's what we don't want, right? So I think I might have forgotten to mention that. But you'll notice here we only have one pawn, right? So if we lose this pawn, we need this pawn to turn into a queen, right? That's the only way we can win the game. With the queen and king, then we can give checkmate. But if we lose this pawn, like what just happened right here, a king versus king, there's no way that you can ever give checkmate. So this is a draw. You don't want to draw when you can possibly win. What about Viksha? Do you have a question?
I wanted to answer the
Oh,
question.
okay. All right. All right. And Rayvansh? Oh, you might. Did you just forget to leave your hand up or take your hand out?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Um, it looks like it's almost we're almost done, but and I don't really want to start another example just to leave you guys in the middle of it. But next week, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start learning about. I think this is the basics of rule of the square. All right. I'll just really quickly. If any of you guys have a chess.com account, which is what I'm using right now, chess.com. You can go here and there's a way for you to practice the rule of the square. If you go to the lesson library, alright, and then you type rule of the square in the search bar, you'll start learn. You can like do a few of these like understanding endgames. You'll see here there's something called rule of the square, right? And I can send a link to this if you want. If you guys have a chess.com account. It's not necessary because we'll just continue going over this in the coming days and in the coming weeks, I mean, and we'll also learn more about like opposition and flanking, which are different techniques, all right? So, does anybody have any questions left about any of this stuff that we've learned? No? All right. So, all right, I'll send you a link to all the stuff like this rule of the square and the recording of this as always is going to be on the YouTube channel, right? So in case you want to rewatch one of the videos or recordings, then you can go ahead and do that, all right? Just to give yourself a refresher on the rule of the square. Okay, if there's no other questions, then if any of you have a question, you can stay on after. But other than that, I will see you guys next Monday. Bye.
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 I'm
Bye.
staying here.